Every book you've ever held, every fact you've ever learned, every story that shaped your understanding of the world, they all trace back to a fragile thread stretching across centuries. Long before hard drives and libraries, our ancestors faced an impossible challenge: how to stop their greatest ideas from vanishing like smoke. Some carved wisdom into clay tablets that outlasted empires. Others wove knowledge into songs passed down for generations, and a few risked everything to hide precious texts in caves and tombs, gambling that someday someone would find them. Today, we're going to follow their trail through secret copying chambers, forgotten storage vaults, and the ingenious tricks early scholars used to cheat time itself. Because the story of how knowledge survived isn't just about the past. It's the reason you're hearing these words right now. Script segment. Think about the last time you tried to remember a phone number without writing it down. Now imagine preserving not just digits, but entire epics, genealogies, and sacred laws word for word across centuries. Before libraries, before printing presses, human memory was the ultimate hard drive. In places like West Africa, griot storytellers didn't just recite history. They were the history books trained from childhood to hold thousands of names, battles, and treaties in their minds. Over in ancient Europe, the Druids used poetic meter like a mental filing system, turning laws and legends into rhythmic verses that rolled off the tongue with precision. What's astonishing isn't just the sheer volume of knowledge they carried, it's how they engineered it to survive. A single slip of memory could rewrite history, so they built in safeguards. Proverbs became mnemonic anchors, songs turned facts into melodies that stuck. Some cultures even assigned specific families as the keepers of certain stories, ensuring redundancy. And it worked. When archaeologists compare oral histories to physical evidence, they often find startling accuracy, like the Aboriginal Australian tales describing coastal landscapes from thousands of years before written records. This wasn't just memorization, it was a high-stakes game of telephone where every generation had to pass the message flawlessly. Today, in places from the Andes to the Arctic, elders still perform this sacred duty, proving that some truths don't fade with time, they resonate in the human voice. The next time you hear a folk song or a grandparent's tale, listen closely. You might be hearing an unbroken thread of wisdom stretching back further than any parchment ever could. Buried beneath the dust of modern Iraq lies one of humanity's most revolutionary breakthroughs, not a tool or weapon, but a simple rectangle of wet clay. When Mesopotamian merchants started pressing reed styluses into these soft surfaces around 3200 BCE, they weren't just tracking sheep inventories. They were inventing time travel. Unlike oral traditions that shifted with every telling, cuneiform script froze words permanently. A receipt for 6 goats could outlast the pyramids. What's staggering isn't just their durability, but their diversity. One tablet might record the world's first customer complaint, a merchant fuming about subpar copper deliveries, while another preserves hymns to forgotten gods. The Epic of Gilgamesh, etched across 12 tablets, survived wars and empires because clay, when baked, laughs at fire and flood. Archaeologists have found tablets still legible after 5,000 years, their wedge-shaped symbols crisp as the day they dried. But the real genius: organization. In Nineveh, King Ashurbanipal stockpiled over 30,000 tablets in history's first systematically catalogued library. Scribes tagged each one like ancient ISBN numbers, sorting them by subject in dedicated rooms. Need medical advice? There was a wing for that, legal precedents. Another corridor. This wasn't just storage, it was a blueprint for how societies could build upon past knowledge rather than constantly reinvent it. Today, every ebook and database owes a silent debt to those Babylonian librarians who proved information could be both preserved and accessed across generations. And here's the kicker, we've barely scratched the surface. Over 500,000 cuneiform tablets remain untranslated, waiting in museum vaults. Each one could rewrite history if we only take the time to listen to the whispers they've guarded for millennia. While Mesopotamians baked their words into clay, Egypt's scribes crafted something far lighter yet no less enduring. Imagine unrolling a sheet of papyrus along the Nile's banks, its surface still vibrant with ink after 3,000 years. This wasn't just paper, it was a revolution. Made by pounding reed fibers into thin sheets, papyrus turned knowledge into something you could roll under your arm and carry across empires. What made it extraordinary wasn't just its portability, but its versatility. One scroll might detail the afterlife spells of the Book of the Dead, while another recorded grain taxes down to the last measure. The Rhind mathematical papyrus, for instance, isn't some dry ledger. It's a snapshot of ancient genius with problems about fractions and geometry that students still study today. And because Egypt's arid air sucked moisture from the air like a sponge, these scrolls survived in tombs and temple vaults, waiting for modern archaeologists to decipher their secrets. But the real game changer, accessibility. Carving hieroglyphs into temple walls was slow, expensive labor, something only pharaohs could commission. Papyrus, though, let scribes work quickly. Suddenly, knowledge wasn't locked in stone. It could travel on riverboats and trade caravans. Contracts, poetry, even personal letters began circulating in ways that would have been unimaginable centuries earlier. When the Greek historian Herodotus visited Egypt, he marveled at how ordinary citizens used papyrus for everything from shopping lists to court petitions. Yet for all its brilliance, papyrus had an Achilles heel: humidity. Scrolls that survived millennia in desert tombs crumbled to dust when exposed to damp climates elsewhere. That's why so much of Egypt's written legacy remained in Egypt, a reminder that even the greatest innovations are shaped by the environments that birthed them. Today, every time you fold a sheet of paper or swipe through an ebook, you're touching the latest chapter in a story that began with those Nile reeds. A story where knowledge finally learned to move. As merchants crisscrossed the vast Silk Road with silks and spices, they carried something far more precious between the saddlebags, ideas that would reshape civilizations. Picture a Persian caravan stopping at a monastery in Afghanistan, where Buddhist monks barter not for gold but for a battered Greek manuscript, or a Chinese alchemist in Samarkand trading formulas for gunpowder in exchange for medical texts from Baghdad. This wasn't just commerce, it was the first global knowledge exchange. What made these trade routes extraordinary wasn't the distance they covered, it's how they turned way stations into universities. Monasteries like Dunhuang in China became scriptoriums where scribes worked day and night, copying texts in dozens of languages. A single book might start as Sanskrit poetry, get translated into Tibetan by monks, then emerge in Ica for Turkic traders. The famous House of Wisdom in Baghdad took this further, employing scholars to translate Greek philosophy into Arabic, rescuing works like Aristotle's Metaphysics from oblivion when Europe had forgotten them. Consider the ripple effects. A mathematical concept from India zero traveled via these routes, revolutionizing Arab and later European science. Paper-making techniques smuggled out of China gave the Islamic world a cheaper alternative to papyrus, turbocharging scholarship. Even religious ideas transformed as they moved. Buddhist sutras adapted into Chinese philosophies, while Persian astronomical charts found their way into Byzantine observatories. The real lesson here: knowledge never stays still. Like water seeping through cracks, it finds a way to spread, whether on camelback, in the memories of pilgrims, or tucked between bolts of silk. Today's internet may move at lightning speed, but the principle remains the same. Every click, every downloaded book carries echoes of those ancient traders who understood that the most valuable cargo isn't what fills coffers, but what changes minds. High in the stone towers of medieval monasteries, where candlelight flickered against cold walls, a quiet revolution was unfolding. While wars raged outside, teams of monks hunched over wooden desks, their hands moving in silent devotion, not just copying words, but rescuing them. Imagine spending an entire year replicating a single book, your fingers cramping as you inked every curve of a Latin psalm or Greek theorem, knowing a single mistake could mean starting over. This wasn't just clerical work, it was an act of defiance against oblivion. The scriptorium was equal parts factory and sanctuary. Here, Chinese letter was sacred. One monk ruled lines on vellum made from calfskin, another mixed pigments from crushed lapis lazuli and egg yolks, while senior scribes penned text with goose feather quills so precise their strokes resembled woven thread. The result, volumes like the Book of Kells, where celestial blues and golds danced around scripture, turning pages into portals to the divine. But beneath the artistry lay raw pragmatism. These weren't just pretty books. They were backup drives for civilization. When Rome fell, taking libraries with it, monasteries became the last strongholds of ancient knowledge. A single Benedictine rule, idleness is the enemy of the soul, drove monks to salvage Plato from charred fragments, Euclid from mildew-stained scrolls. In Ireland's remote monasteries, insulated from continental chaos, scribes preserved not only Christian texts but pagan philosophy too, often adding marginalia that revealed their own wit. The ink is thin, the parchment hairy, I'm freezing. The true miracle scale. By the 12th century, the scriptorium at Cluny Abbey in France churned out hundreds of manuscripts annually, creating de facto distribution hubs where visiting scholars could access rare works. This network, part spiritual, part logistical, kept ideas circulating even when roads were too dangerous for travel. Today, when you download a digital book in seconds, remember, it all began with those anonymous hands tracing letters by candlelight, stitching the past back together one painstaking word at a time. And here's what's haunting, we'll never know how much was lost. For every masterpiece that survived, countless others crumbled into dust or were scrubbed clean to make room for new texts, a practice called palimpsest. Yet the legacy endures. Those monks didn't just save Aristotle or Virgil. They proved that knowledge, when tended with care, can outlast empires, plagues, and even the darkest of ages. Flames weren't the only thing that made the Library of Alexandria burn bright. Picture a waterfront complex where philosophers argued under colonnades, astronomers charted the stars from rooftop observatories, and scribes raced to transcribe every scroll unloaded from docked ships. This wasn't just a collection of books, it was the ancient world's internet hub, a place where Babylonian star charts met Greek poetry and Egyptian medical texts. At its peak, it may have held 500,000 scrolls, each a thread in the tapestry of human thought. What set Alexandria apart wasn't just its scale, but its radical inclusivity. Ptolemaic kings sent agents to raid incoming ships, not for gold, but for manuscripts. Every borrowed text was copied, originals kept, duplicates returned to owners. They commissioned translations of Hebrew scriptures into Greek, hired multilingual scholars to digest Persian and Indian treatises, and even legend claims sacrificed sacred accuracy for volume, letting errors creep into texts in their rush to preserve them. Imperfect knowledge, they seemed to believe, was better than lost knowledge, yet for all its grandeur, the library's fate is wrapped in layers of myth. Contrary to popular belief, it likely didn't vanish in a single catastrophic fire. Historical records point to a slower decline, accidental blazes, funding cuts under Roman rule, and the gradual dispersal of scrolls to other centers like Constantinople. The real tragedy isn't in how it fell, but what fell. Entire works by playwrights like Sophocles, scientific treatises by Archimedes, and first-hand accounts of cultures that left no other trace. Here's the paradox that still haunts us. Alexandria's physical structure is dust, but its ethos is everywhere. The modern Library of Alexandria, rebuilt in 2002, echoes its ancestors' ambition with digitization projects safeguarding everything from Coptic hymns to Syrian war archives. More profoundly, its legacy lies in every institution that treats knowledge as a commons not owned by one nation or era, but held in trust for humanity. When you visit a local library or search an online database, you're walking in the footsteps of those ancient scholars who believed no idea should ever be truly lost. The lesson isn't just about destruction, it's about obsession. Alexandria teaches us that preservation isn't passive. It demands relentless effort, imperfect choices, and sometimes the courage to borrow without asking. Because in the end, what's not saved is just as defining as what survives. While Europe navigated the so-called Dark Ages, a different kind of light burned in the bustling alleys of Baghdad. Within the domed halls of the House of Wisdom, a team of scholars, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, pored over crumbling Greek manuscripts, their ink-stained fingers racing against time. They weren't just copying words, they were building a lifeline for ideas on the brink of vanishing forever. This translation movement wasn't some dry academic exercise, it was an all-hands rescue mission. Caliphs paid translators the weight of their work in gold, creating an intellectual gold rush. Hunayn ibn Ishaq, a Nestorian Christian physician, perfected a system. He'd render Greek texts into Syriac, his native tongue, then refine them into crystalline Arabic. His translations of Hippocrates' medical texts became so precise, European universities still use them 8 centuries later. Other scholars tackled philosophy, transforming Plato's dialogues and Aristotle's logic into something entirely new, commentaries with Islamic insights woven through the original text like golden threads. But here's what's often overlooked. This wasn't one-way traffic. Persian mathematical treatises and Sanskrit astronomy manuals flowed into Arabic alongside Greek works, creating a fusion cuisine of knowledge. The numeral system we use today, thank Arabic scribes who adapted Indian numbers, the astrolabe that guided medieval sailors, redesigned by Baghdad's craftsmen using Hellenistic blueprints. The House of Wisdom didn't just preserve, it remixed, proving that the best libraries aren't mausoleums, but kitchens where ideas simmer together. The real twist came when this treasure trove circled back to Europe. In 12th century Toledo, Christian and Jewish scholars pored over Arabic manuscripts, translating them into Latin, often via Spanish. Suddenly, Aquinas was quoting Ibn Sina Avicenna, and Dante's cosmology echoed Islamic scholars. The Renaissance didn't spring from nowhere, it stood on scaffolding built by those Baghdad translators. What's humbling is how close we came to losing it all. Many Greek originals they worked from are gone, only their Arabic versions remain. Today, when a surgeon consults Hippocrates' oath or a physicist cites Aristotle's laws of motion, they're speaking words that survived because a group of scholars 9 centuries ago decided no wisdom should ever be disposable. On windswept cliffs and moss-covered boulders across Scandinavia, the Vikings left behind more than just sagas of conquest. They etched their history into the very bones of the earth. Take one step toward a runestone like Denmark's Jelling Monument, and you're not just looking at art, you're standing before a 900-year-old tweet hammered into granite for eternity. What's striking isn't just the runes themselves, those angular letters designed to be carved cleanly into wood or stone, but why they were used. While other cultures wrote on perishable parchment, Norse leaders chose materials that could shrug off blizzards and centuries. The Rök runestone in Sweden, for instance, isn't just a memorial. It's a puzzle box of Kenning's poetic riddles honoring a fallen sun, with passages that still spark debates among linguists today. Even their practical messages had flair. A Viking-era land deed might begin with a dragon's head before getting to the legal specifics. Climate played a silent role in this storytelling. In Mediterranean regions, papyrus could decay within decades, but Scandinavia's freezing winters and dry summers acted as natural preservatives. The Rosetta Stone in Sweden, carved in the 9th century, still shows every stroke of its rune master's chisel, recounting battles and lineage with crisp clarity. That durability came with a cost, though. Unlike scrolls that could hold entire epics, runestones demanded brevity. Every word had to earn its place, turning inscriptions into haikus of heroism or loss. Yet for all their toughness, runestones hid delicate surprises. Some were painted in vibrant reds and blues, their colors long faded but detectable by chemical traces. Others, like the gelling stones, served as multimedia monuments, one side boasting of King Harold's military conquests, the other quietly announcing Denmark's conversion to Christianity, complete with an early portrait of Christ tangled in Viking-style knotwork. It's a reminder that these weren't just records, they were boundary markers of identity, signaling shifts in power and belief to anyone who passed by. Today, over 6,000 runestones still dot the Nordic landscape, some repurposed as church steps or cellar walls by later generations unaware of their significance. But their legacy is everywhere, from the runic F hiding in your smartphone's Bluetooth symbol, a nod to King Harold Bluetooth, who united Denmark to fantasy novels borrowing their cryptic allure. The Vikings could have chosen easier ways to write, but they understood something we often forget. True endurance isn't just about surviving the elements, it's about carving your story so deeply into the world that even time can't erase it. Tucked away in a British museum vault lies a fragile scroll that changed everything. A 7-foot-long ribbon of paper stamped with intricate Chinese characters and a vivid Buddha illustration, dated precisely to the year 868. This is the Diamond Sutra, the world's oldest printed book, and it didn't come from a press with movable type, but from a craftsman patiently carving words into wood. Woodblock printing wasn't just a technical leap, it was a democratization of knowledge. Imagine the process. A scribe brushed characters onto thin paper, which was pressed face down onto a sanded plank. Using knives finer than surgical tools, artisans carved away everything not part of the text, leaving raised characters that could be inked and stamped onto fresh sheets. One block could yield thousands of copies before wearing out, a radical concept when most books were copied by hand, one painstaking page at a time. But here's what's easily overlooked: this wasn't just about religion. While Buddhist scriptures like the Diamond Sutra spread wisdom across monasteries, bureaucrats harnessed the same technology to print tax forms, dictionaries, even civil service exam guides. Suddenly, standardized knowledge wasn't reserved for elites, it could flood markets and rural villages. A Tang dynasty farmer might never own a hand-copied Confucian classic, but a woodblock-printed almanac. That was within reach. The real genius lay in distribution. Printed manuals stabilized imperial rule by ensuring every provincial governor worked from the same rulebook. Poetry anthologies circulated like bestsellers, creating shared cultural touchstones across vast distances. And because woodblocks were lightweight compared to clay tablets or parchment scrolls, they traveled effortlessly along trade routes, proof that the most transformative ideas often come in humble packages. What's haunting is how much we've lost. The Diamond Sutra survived only because a monk sealed it in a cave for 9 centuries, part of a hidden library guarding 17,000 texts. Yet its legacy pulses through every paperback and PDF today. Gutenberg gets the glory, but it was these anonymous Chinese artisans who first proved that knowledge, when multiplied, could bend the arc of history. Their lesson still holds. Preservation isn't just about saving ideas, it's about setting them free. Beneath the towering pyramids of the Maya, knowledge didn't just live in stone, it breathed on the pages of books that could fold like maps. Picture a priest astronomer unfolding an accordion-style codex made from fig tree bark, its surfaces coated in a shimmering plaster-like finish. With a sweep of his finger, he traces predictions for Venus's movements that would take European scholars another century to calculate. These weren't mere records, they were cosmic passports linking earthly rulers to celestial rhythms. What makes the surviving codices extraordinary isn't just their content, but their defiance. When Spanish friars burned thousands of these books as works of the devil, they overlooked four now known as the Dresden, Madrid, Paris, and Grolier codices that slipped through the flames. The Dresden Codex alone contains lunar tables accurate to within 1 day over a span of 33 years, plus sophisticated eclipse warnings plotted in a complex base 20 numbering system. Imagine the precision required to paint these calculations with cactus spine brushes, using pigments from crushed insects and sacred blue Maya clay. Yet the real story lies in what's missing. Colonial accounts describe codices detailing medicinal herbs, trade routes, and dynastic histories, entire libraries reduced to ashes. One surviving page from the Madrid Codex shows a deity holding a severed head, surrounded by cryptic glyphs about agricultural cycles. Was this a ritual calendar, a metaphor for the maize harvest? We may never know the full context because the books that could have explained it now exist only as whispers in Spanish friars' guilt-ridden journals. Here's the twist: these codices weren't passive repositories, they were performative. Priests likely recited their contents aloud during ceremonies, blending text with oral tradition. The vibrant illustrations, jaguars coiled around numerals, gods bearing downpours from serpentine clouds, weren't just decoration. They anchored memory, turning each page into a multisensory experience. Today, when scholars painstakingly scan these fragile pages with multispectral imaging, they're not just recovering information, they're eavesdropping on dialogues between scribes and the divine. The tragedy of the Maya codices isn't merely the loss of knowledge, it's the severing of a living thread. These books weren't meant to sit behind glass, they were guides for ruling cities, healing the sick, and reading the sky's intentions. Every glyph we struggle to decipher now was once as familiar as a roadside sign. And that's the quiet rebellion of the four survivors. In their precise Venus tables and rain petitioning rituals, they prove that some voices, even when silenced, find ways to echo across centuries. Script segment. In the humid jungles of southern India, where monsoon rains could turn parchment to pulp in weeks, scholars found an unlikely ally in the humble palm tree. Scribes would carefully harvest its leaves, boil them in turmeric-infused water, then dry them into smooth, golden rectangles ready for writing. With a stylus no thicker than a needle, they etched sacred verses from the Vedas or complex astronomical charts onto these organic pages, each stroke precise enough that even today, centuries later, the ink sits perfectly within the leaf's fibrous grooves. What's remarkable isn't just the durability of these manuscripts, some surviving over a millennium, but the ingenuity behind their preservation. To outsmart insects and moisture, scribes treated leaves with citronella oil or crushed neem seeds, creating natural pesticides that doubled as aromatic protectors. Bound together with silk cords and stored in wooden boxes lined with sandalwood powder, these bundles became time capsules of philosophy, medicine, and mathematics. The Bakshali manuscript, for instance, contains the earliest known use of the concept of zero, a revolutionary idea scribbled onto palm leaves that would later reshape global mathematics. Yet the true brilliance lay in their portability. Unlike stone stelae or clay tablets, palm leaf books could travel. Buddhist monks carried them across the Himalayas to Tibet, while traders brought Ayurvedic medical texts to Southeast Asia. Each leaf was drilled with holes so they could be threaded and reordered like a prehistoric loose leaf notebook, a feature that allowed later scholars to add commentaries or correct errors without damaging the original text. Imagine annotating a sacred text by simply sliding in a new leaf beside the old one. The irony, these manuscripts were never meant to last forever. Palm leaves naturally yellow and brittle over time, a built-in expiration date that forced communities to continually recopy and re-engage with their contents. Unlike static inscriptions, the knowledge stayed alive through ritual renewal. Today, when conservators in Chennai or Kathmandu gently clean these leaves with soft brushes, they're not just preserving artifacts, they're touching the latest link in an unbroken chain of caretakers who understood that wisdom, like nature, thrives when tended across generations. And here's the quiet lesson these leaves whisper: sometimes the most fragile materials guard the toughest ideas. While empires rose and fell on stone monuments, it was the humble palm leaf, flexible, renewable, and rooted in its environment, that carried the future forward. Script segment. Deep in the cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea, a Bedouin shepherd tossed a stone into a hidden cave in 1947 and heard the unmistakable sound of shattering pottery. What he stumbled upon wasn't just broken clay, but a time capsule sealed for 2,000 years. Inside those jars lay the Dead Sea Scrolls, hundreds of parchment fragments preserving everything from biblical psalms to community rules of a long-vanished Jewish sect. What makes these texts extraordinary isn't just their age, it's the sheer ordinariness of their hiding place. No grand tombs or temple vaults here, just dry caves where the desert's parched air acted like a natural preservative, freezing ink on animal hide parchment in perfect detail. Scholars later pieced together fragments revealing multiple versions of Isaiah's prophecies, previously unknown hymns, and even a copper scroll listing buried treasures, some still unfound. The scrolls didn't just survive, they thrived in obscurity, shielded from sunlight, moisture, and the hands of revisionists. But here's the twist: these weren't formal library archives. Many show signs of heavy use, wrinkled edges, repaired tears, margin notes debating theological fine points. This was working knowledge, hidden in haste when Roman armies advanced. The scribes of Qumran, who copied these texts with almost superhuman precision, likely never imagined their scrolls would outlast empires. Yet by choosing clay jars over display cases, they gave future generations something priceless: an unfiltered glimpse into how sacred texts were read, debated, and lived before canonization smoothed their rough edges. Today, infrared imaging reveals letters invisible to the naked eye, while DNA analysis traces parchment origins to specific herds of goats and sheep. But the real revelation is philosophical. The Dead Sea Scrolls remind us that sometimes the greatest truths aren't stored in marble halls. They're tucked into cracks in the earth, waiting for a chance encounter to resurrect them. When that shepherd's stone struck clay, it didn't just uncover ancient words. It proved that preservation isn't always about honor. It's about humility. Hide knowledge well enough and even time can't erase it. Now consider this: over 100 caves were searched, but only 11 held scrolls. What else might still lie buried in those sun-baked cliffs, silently biding its time? The desert, it seems, hasn't given up all its secrets yet. Script segment. In the flickering torchlight of Constantinople's palace workshops, teams of scribes scrambled to accomplish what no search engine could: preserve an entire civilization's knowledge before it slipped away. Emperor Constantine Roman VII, ruling in the 10th century, didn't just want his reign remembered. He was obsessed with salvaging what remained of antiquity itself. The result: monumental encyclopedias like the Suda, a 1,000-year-old Wikipedia scrawled across manuscripts, compiling everything from Homer's lost poems to instructions for building siege engines. What set these Byzantine projects apart wasn't just their scale, it was their urgency. As wars and neglect erased libraries across the former Roman Empire, scholars raced to extract the most vital fragments. Imagine scribes hunched over deteriorating scrolls, cherry-picking passages about philosophy, medicine, and even stage directions for long-dead Greek plays. Unlike modern encyclopedias designed for casual reference, these were rescue missions, their margins often crammed with desperate notes like, "This is the only surviving copy." The Suda itself reads like a time traveler's notebook. One entry might dissect a cryptic line from Sophocles, while another explains how to interpret dreams or calculates leap years in the Julian calendar. Some sections feel startlingly modern biographical sketches of historians, cross-reference debates on ethics, while others drift into myth, blending fact and legend with equal reverence. That mix wasn't carelessness, it reflected a world where the boundaries between scholarship and storytelling were often porous. Here's the twist: these encyclopedias weren't just for elites. Copies circulated among merchants, physicians, and even military officers, creating a shared intellectual foundation across the empire. A general might consult a volume on ancient battle tactics, while a midwife referenced Hippocratic techniques preserved nowhere else. And because Byzantine ink adhered stubbornly to parchment, these works outlasted the empire that birthed them, becoming lifelines for Renaissance scholars desperate to reconnect with classical wisdom. The quiet genius of these projects, they embraced imperfection. Rather than waiting for flawless originals, scribes worked with battered, half-legible sources, stitching together knowledge like a quilt of scraps. Today, when you scroll through a digital archive or skim a Wikipedia rabbit hole, you're tapping into the same human impulse that drove those Byzantine scholars, the understanding that even fractured wisdom, gathered with care, can light the way forward. Script segment. While Europe's monasteries guarded knowledge behind thick stone walls, the libraries of the Islamic world threw their doors open to anyone hungry to learn. In the heart of medieval Cordoba, a visitor might have stumbled upon a breathtaking sight, a library with over 400,000 volumes, stacked not just with religious texts but works of astronomy, medicine, and philosophy from Greece, India, and Persia. What made this place revolutionary wasn't just its size. It was the chorus of languages echoing through its halls as Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scholars debated side by side under Moorish rule. But Cordoba wasn't alone. Far to the south, in the golden city of Timbuktu, scribes were crafting manuscripts that would rewrite Africa's intellectual history. Bound in delicate goat leather and written in flowing Arabic script, these texts covered everything from mathematics to court rulings, some even blending Arabic with local languages like Songhai and Tamashek. The Ahmed Baba Institute alone preserves tens of thousands, their pages filled with star charts, legal arguments, and poetry so vivid you can almost hear the desert wind in its verses. What's often overlooked is how these libraries functioned. Unlike private collections hoarded by elites, many operated like early public universities. In Cordoba, books were loaned freely, even to students who couldn't afford them. Copyists worked around the clock to produce affordable editions, while translators transformed Greek logic into Arabic, then Spanish, creating a relay race of ideas across languages. Timbuktu's scholars took it further, embedding knowledge into daily life. A merchant's contract might cite philosophical texts, and children memorized scientific primers alongside the Quran. The real loss isn't just the books burned during invasions or lost to time. It's the model they represented. These were spaces where knowledge wasn't just stored but actively cross-pollinated. A Jewish physician in Cordoba could critique an Arab astronomer's star maps, while a Berber trader in Timbuktu might commission a manuscript blending Islamic law with local customs. When we talk about the Dark Ages, we're ignoring these brilliant oases where curiosity burned brighter than any torch. Today, as conservators in Mali painstakingly restore Timbuktu's water-damaged manuscripts, or digitization projects reunite scattered Andalusian texts, we're reminded that great libraries aren't just buildings, they're testaments to what happens when cultures refuse to build walls between ideas. The scribes of these cities didn't just preserve knowledge, they proved it grows strongest when shared. Script segment, the cobblestone courtyards of medieval Europe's first universities hummed with something far more valuable than gold: the sound of pens scratching against parchment. In places like Bologna and Oxford, students didn't just attend lectures, they became part of a revolutionary knowledge factory. While monks in secluded monasteries had long been the guardians of texts, universities turned preservation into a collective endeavor where every scholar's hand played a role in safeguarding ideas for the future. At the heart of this system lay the Picia, a brilliant innovation that supercharged book production. Instead of hoarding a single, irreplaceable manuscript, universities would break prized texts into sections, lending these out to students who copied them in shifts. Picture a classroom where your tuition literally involved transcribing Aristotle's works, your pen racing against the setting sun to return your borrowed chapter on time. This wasn't just busy work, it was a democratization of access. Suddenly, a single medical text from Salerno could spawn dozens of copies, each carried home by graduating physicians to spread expertise across Europe. What's often overlooked is how these university libraries operated. Unlike the locked chests of noblemen's collections, books here were chained to desks not to restrict access but to enable it. A student in Paris could walk into the Sorbonne's library, flip through Avicenna's medical canon at a reading stand, and debate its theories with peers, all while the chain ensured the volume remained for the next curious mind. These chains weren't shackles, they were lifelines tethering generations of scholars to a shared lineage of thought, the true legacy of these institutions. They transformed preservation from a sacred duty into a civic one. When Oxford's first library catalogue appeared in 1320, it didn't just list books, it mapped a living network of knowledge, linking legal glossaries from Bologna to botanical tracts from Montpellier. And because students copied texts in their own dialects, ideas morphed as they traveled, absorbing local nuances like linguistic seeds taking root in new soil. Today, when you see a university library soaring shelves or download an open-access journal, you're witnessing the latest chapter in a story those medieval scribes began. They understood something timeless. Knowledge survives not when it's entombed in silence, but when it's set loose in the hands of those hungry enough to copy, question, and carry it forward. Script segment. The year was 1455 when a goldsmith named Johannes Gutenberg did the impossible. He turned wine presses into time machines. His workshop in Mainz, Germany, became a cradle for what we now call incarnabula, the earliest printed books that straddled two worlds. Imagine the shock of medieval scribes seeing their painstakingly copied scriptures emerge from a clanking metal press, page after identical page, inked letters crisp as frost on parchment. This wasn't just a new way to make books, it was a seismic shift in who could own knowledge. Gutenberg's genius lay in fusion. He took the scribe's artistry, the graceful Gothic fonts, the rubrics in red ink, and married them to mechanical precision. His 42-line Bible, with its 2-volume grandeur, wasn't some crude prototype. Its columns mirrored monastic manuscripts so closely that many buyers initially thought they'd purchased hand-copied works. But unlike a scribe's labor of years, Gutenberg could produce hundreds in months. Suddenly, universities and merchants could afford texts that once required a king's ransom. Yet the real revolution was subtler. Early printers didn't just churn out new works, they raced to rescue old ones. When the fall of Constantinople sent waves of Greek refugees westward, printers like Aldus Manutius in Venice pounced on their rare manuscripts. His portable octavo editions shrank Homer and Aristotle into pocket-sized books travelers could carry like treasure. Other printers became accidental archivists, reproducing crumbling Latin grammars or medieval herbal guides that might otherwise have vanished. That's the paradox of incunabula. They heralded the machine age while clinging to medieval aesthetics, their pages still sporting hand-painted initials and margins wide enough for monks' annotations. What's often forgotten is how messy this transition was. Early print runs brimmed with quirks, pages set upside down, variant spellings, even blank spaces left for illuminators who never showed up. Collectors today prize these errors as fingerprints of a technology finding its feet. And in a twist Gutenberg never foresaw, his invention also birthed the first copyright battles as rival printers pirated bestsellers with shameless audacity. The legacy of these incunabula pulses through every paperback and e-reader today. They prove that preservation doesn't mean embalming knowledge in amber. It means multiplying its voices until they're too numerous to silence. When you swipe through an ebook or dog-era novel, you're part of a chain that began with those Inca, imperfect pages in Mainz. The message was clear: once knowledge learns to reproduce, it becomes immortal. And here's the quiet revelation hidden in those early books. The most transformative technologies aren't those that erase the past, but those that carry it forward, flaws and all. The incunabula didn't just print letters, they pressed the medieval world into conversation with the future, one metal type at a time. High in the Swiss Alps, buried beneath a glacier on the Matterhorn, lies a time capsule that won't see daylight until the year 6098. Inside this titanium vault, a sapphire disk etched with instructions for future civilizations to decode our knowledge using nothing but sunlight and a simple magnifying glass. But this isn't some modern vanity project. It's the latest chapter in an ancient tradition that began when our ancestors tucked their most precious truths into the earth itself, whispering to futures they'd never live to see. Consider China's bronze ding vessels from 3,000 years ago, cauldrons cast not just for ritual feasts, but as immortal archives. Emperors had entire legal codes and historical records engraved onto their interiors before burying them like seeds. When archaeologists unearth one today, they're not just finding art, they're cracking open a legal hard drive from antiquity, its glyphs still gleaming beneath crusted soil. Half a world away in 1936, a bizarre ceremony unfolded in an underground vault at Oglethorpe University. A team led by historian Thornwell Jacobs sealed everything from a working typewriter to Donald Duck comics into the crypt of civilization. A hermetically sealed chamber meant to endure until the year 8113. The contents seem whimsical until you realize their intent: to show future excavators not just what we knew, but how we lived, the texture of daily thought preserved like insects in amber. What unites these acts across millennia isn't just foresight, it's humility. The bronze scribes of Shang China and the microfilm archivists of Georgia shared a quiet admission: we might not matter to you, but our mistakes and triumphs could. Whether carved on alloy or polymer, these buried messages reject the arrogance that any era is an endpoint. Instead, they plant knowledge like acorns, trusting against all odds that someone someday will stand in the right patch of earth and dig. And here's the aching beauty of it: these time capsules seldom survive by accident. They endure because their creators chose materials: bronze that resists corrosion, titanium indifferent to ice, that argue with time itself. The same instinct drives modern efforts like the Arctic World Archive, where reels of film encoded with humanity's greatest texts sleep in an abandoned coal mine, guarded by permafrost and polar bears. These buried troves ask us a silent question. What would you wrap carefully enough to hand directly to the future? Not what you display in a museum, but what you'd hide like a love letter beneath floorboards, hoping the right hands might find it when the ink of history has long dried. Because every buried vessel, every sealed crypt is ultimately a bet that curiosity outlasts empires, and that knowledge, when entrusted to the earth with care, becomes a bridge no span of years can fully collapse. Beneath the scorching Australian sun, an elder walks across cracked red earth, not wandering aimlessly, but tracing a living map older than the pyramids. With each step, he sings verses that name rock formations, waterholes, and constellations in precise sequence. This is a songline, a navigational masterpiece where every lyric corresponds to landmarks spanning thousands of miles. Forget ink and parchment here. The land itself becomes the library, and the human voice its enduring catalogue. The brilliance of songlines lies in their layered design. A single melody might encode hunting paths, genealogies, even geological events from the dream time, all anchored to physical terrain, need to cross the desert. Follow the song's rhythm and you'll find water where the lyrics promise. Unlike static manuscripts, these oral maps adapt. When floods alter a river's course, the song evolves to match. Archaeologists have found that some routes, preserved unbroken for over 40,000 years, align perfectly with Ice Age coastlines now submerged, its memory sculpted into melody, proving that some of history's most precise records were written in air, not stone. Meanwhile, high in the Andes, Inca administrators faced a puzzle: how to govern the largest empire in the Americas without a written script. Their answer dangled from strings: quipus, intricate knots of cotton and camelid wool that recorded everything from tax quotas to epic poetry. At first glance, these tasseled cords resemble abstract art, but each knot's position, color, and twist held meaning. A cluster of red knots might tally corn harvests, while a zigzagging blue thread could narrate a king's coronation. Spanish chroniclers watched in frustration as Inca officials read quipus aloud like books, extracting census data and laws from what looked like tangled yarn. What binds these systems together is their defiance of paper-based thinking. Where Western archives obsess over fixed texts, songlines and quipus treat knowledge as kinetic, woven into movement, touch, and communal participation. A quipu wasn't just stored, it was performed, its knots activated by fingers tracing their contours. Similarly, Aboriginal elders don't own songlines, they steward them, teaching the next generation to sing the world into memory. Modern science is only beginning to catch up. Researchers using 3D imaging have discovered that quipu knots follow mathematical patterns akin to binary code, while linguists now recognize songlines as sophisticated mnemonic algorithms. These weren't primitive workarounds for illiteracy, they were parallel revolutions in data storage, engineered for cultures where landscape and community were the ultimate hard drives. The lesson whispered by these chords and songs is urgent today. Preservation isn't just about saving information, but how it lives. While fire can erase a library, it can't silence a songline carried in hundreds of hearts, or unravel a quipu story when hands still remember its language. Some truths don't need paper to endure, they need people to keep stepping, tying, and singing them forward. Script segment. In the summer of 1799, a French soldier patrolling the dusty ruins of Rosetta in Egypt stumbled upon a slab of black basalt that would become the ultimate linguistic skeleton key. The Rosetta Stone wasn't just another artifact, it was a stroke of cosmic luck. Carved in 196 BC, this unassuming slab bore the same decree in 3 scripts: formal hieroglyphs, everyday Demotic Egyptian, and ancient Greek. Like finding identical messages in a forgotten cipher, a familiar language, and modern English, it handed scholars the tools to decode what had been silent for over a millennium. What makes the Rosetta Stone extraordinary isn't just its bilingual text, it's the sheer improbability of its survival. Used as construction filler in a medieval fort, it avoided being ground into dust or melted down for lime. The stone's inscriptions, though worn at the edges, remained crisp enough for linguists like Jean-François Champollion to spend 20 years matching Greek names like Ptolemy to their hieroglyphic counterparts. His breakthrough came when he realized hieroglyphs weren't just pictograms, they could represent sounds, much like letters. Suddenly, the whispers of scribes and priests long turned to dust found their voice again. But here's the twist, the Rosetta Stone wasn't unique in its time. Similar multilingual steles likely stood across ancient Egypt, yet this was the one that survived wars, reuse, and sheer neglect. Its message, a bland tax decree praising a teenage pharaoh, was bureaucratically mundane, proving that history often hinges on the ordinary. Today, the stone sits in the British Museum, its glass case surrounded by visitors who may not grasp the irony. The very empire that looted it also ensured its global fame, turning an administrative footnote into the key that resurrected an entire civilization's literature. The real lesson here isn't about translation, it's about access. For centuries, Egypt's tombs and temples screamed their stories in a language no one could understand. The Rosetta Stone taught us that preservation is only half the battle. Without interpretation, knowledge remains locked in plain sight. Modern archivists now apply this wisdom, pairing digitized scrolls with AI translation tools and annotating artifacts with contextual clues. Because every forgotten ledger, every faded inscription could be someone's Rosetta Stone, waiting for the right mind to crack its code. And perhaps that's the stone's quietest revelation. Some discoveries aren't just about the past they reveal, but the future they make possible. With hieroglyphs deciphered, suddenly the Book of the Dead spells, Ramses's battle accounts, and even grocery lists scribbled by laborers could speak across the ages. One unassuming slab reminded us that the greatest treasures aren't always gold or jewels sometimes. They're the mundane keys that open doors we didn't even know were closed. Script segment, picture this. A historian 5 centuries from now unearths a perfectly preserved flash drive from our time. They plug it in and silence. The file formats are unreadable, the software long extinct, the data trapped behind layers of forgotten encryption. Unlike the Rosetta Stone or Maya codices, our digital footprints risk vanishing not through fire or neglect, but through something far more insidious: obsolescence. We're living in the middle of what archivists grimly call the digital dark age. Ancient scribes battled humidity and invaders. Our crisis is invisible. A PDF you saved in the 90s might already be corrupted beyond recovery. Social media platforms collapse, taking millions of personal histories with them. Even NASA admits it's lost data from early space missions because the reel-to-reel tapes degraded, and the machines to read them were scrapped decades ago. The irony stings. We've built the most sophisticated knowledge-sharing system in history, only to watch it dissolve like sandcastles at high tide. But here's where the story turns. The same urgency that drove medieval monks to copy manuscripts now fuels modern digital archaeologists. Teams at places like the Internet Archive are racing to embalm websites, using tools like the Wayback Machine to snap billions of virtual pages before they vanish. Meanwhile, the GitHub Arctic Vault buried open-source code in a decommissioned coal mine, sealed in reels of archival film designed to last 1,000 years. These aren't just backups, they're time capsules for the post-apocalyptic programmer. Yet the hardest challenge isn't storage, it's meaning. Future scholars might recover our files, but will they understand TikTok videos or cryptocurrency ledgers? Ancient scribes left us marginalia and colophons notes about their process. Our metadata is often an afterthought. Some libraries now require authors to submit digital wills, explaining their file structures and passwords. Others are experimenting with AI to translate obsolete formats, creating a Rosetta Stone for floppy files. The twist: some of humanity's most vulnerable knowledge today isn't grand treatises, it's the mundane. Text messages between loved ones, protest live streams, indie games built on abandoned engines. These fragments, not official records, often reveal how ordinary people lived. Archivists now scramble to preserve them, knowing future historians may judge our era not by what we kept, but by what we almost let slip away. So the next time you back up your photos or curse a software update, remember, you're not just managing files. You're part of an ancient chain, one that stretches from Babylonian librarians to Byzantine scribes to the IT worker, migrating servers before the old ones fail. The mediums change, but the mission stays the same: to outsmart time, one stubborn byte at a time. Script segment across the globe. In Norway's Arctic Circle, deep inside a decommissioned coal mine, rows of sleek servers hum quietly in the frigid darkness. This is the GitHub Arctic Code Vault, a modern-day equivalent of the Dead Sea Scroll caves, where millions of lines of open-source software have been etched onto archival film designed to last 1,000 years. Yet despite the futuristic setting, the mission here would feel painfully familiar to a medieval monk or Babylonian scribe: protect fragile knowledge from the unrelenting march of time. The parallels between ancient and modern preservation techniques are striking. Where Mesopotamians baked their cuneiform tablets for durability, institutions like the Vatican Library now use nitrogen-sealed chambers to slow oxidation on parchment. The Library of Alexandria's practice of copying every ship's manuscript finds its echo in blockchain archivists, who distribute identical copies of digital texts across thousands of computers to ensure no single failure can erase them. Even the humble footnote has evolved. Hyperlinks now create the same web of cross-references that medieval scribes once painstakingly hand-wrote in manuscript margins. Yet some ancient principles remain irreplaceable. Take redundancy. Just as Buddhist monks hid multiple copies of sutras across Dunhuang's caves, the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine preserves over 700 billion web page snapshots. Accessibility, too, mirrors Cordoba's open-door libraries. Project Gutenberg and Google Books have digitized millions of works, granting free access to texts that once required a pilgrimage to distant monasteries. Most profound is the shared reverence for knowledge as a living force. When archivists today debate whether to preserve viral memes or tweets alongside Shakespeare, they're grappling with the same question Egyptian scribes faced: what deserves to speak to the future? The challenges, however, have scaled exponentially. Ancient scribes worried about fire and worms. Digital archivists battle bit rot and proprietary file formats. A single change in JPEG compression could render millions of family photos unreadable, just as surely as the dampness that crumbled Maya codices. That's why initiatives like UNESCO Memory of the World program now blend cutting-edge tech with ancient wisdom, storing data in DNA strands that could outlast stone tablets, while also training communities to maintain oral histories as indigenous cultures have done for millennia. Perhaps the most humbling lesson is this: no vault, no matter how advanced, is foolproof. The monks who hid the Dead Sea Scrolls never imagined Roman soldiers would abandon their siege, leaving the jars undisturbed. Similarly, today's archivists can't predict which of their efforts will matter most to future generations. All they can do, like the scribes before them, is cast as many threads into time's river as possible, trusting that some will endure the currents. Because whether etched in clay, inked on vellum, or encoded in synthetic genes, knowledge survives only when someone cares enough to pass it forward. And so the work continues, not with the arrogance that we've solved preservation, but with the quiet determination of those who have come before. From the monk's candlelit scriptorium to the sterile glow of server farms, the essential truth remains. Civilization is a conversation across centuries, and every act of preservation is a vote for that conversation to continue. Script segment. There's a moment frozen in time inside Chauvet Cave in southern France. Our child's footprints, pressed into soft clay 30,000 years ago, preserved beside the towering silhouette of a cave bear. This tiny imprint, so fragile it might vanish with a single misplaced step, wasn't just left behind, it was left for us, that child, walking past flickering torchlight and paintings of running horses, likely never imagined their footsteps would outlast empires. Yet here they remain, a whisper from deep time. This is the paradox of preservation. The methods change, but the hunger to defy oblivion is ancient. The griot singer memorizing a 1,000-year genealogy, the Tibetan monk carving sacred mantras into river stones, the teenager backing up selfies to the cloud, all are fighting the same battle. It's not just about safeguarding facts, it's about refusing to let the fire go out. Look closely at any preservation method, and you'll see a culture's deepest fears stamped into its design. The Vikings carved runestones to withstand blizzards because their world was one of ice and violence. Egyptians buried papyrus in desert tombs, betting on dry air over damp rot. Even today, when we encode data in DNA strands or bury hardened drives in Arctic vaults, we're not just solving technical problems, we're confessing our anxieties. Will nuclear war erase our servers? Will climate change drown our archives? The mediums evolve, but the question remains, how do we make memory stick when everything else fades? What's often forgotten is how much hinges on sheer stubbornness. The Mahabharata, one of humanity's longest epics, survived through a relay race of recitation, generations of Brahmin scholars dedicating their lives to chanting its 200,000 verses perfectly. The irony, oral traditions like this often prove more durable than early digital files. While floppy disks from the 80s now lie mute, the Vedic hymns passed down for 500 years still resonate in temples today. Yet the most fragile ingredient isn't clay or code, it's care. The Dead Sea Scrolls only survived because someone sealed them in jars before Roman legions arrived. The Rosetta Stone endured because a French soldier recognized its worth amid rubble. Even now, as algorithms scrape the internet for unimportant data to delete, librarians fight to archive tweets and memes as fervently as medieval monks copied grocery lists onto parchment margins. Because history isn't just written by the powerful, it's pieced together from whatever fragments ordinary people bothered to save. So when we marvel at a perfectly preserved cuneiform tablet or a crisply digitized manuscript, we're not just seeing technical mastery. We're witnessing love letters to the future, messages scrawled, whispered, or encoded by people who believed, against all odds, that someone would come looking. The child in Chauvet Cave didn't leave footprints for us, they left them despite us, and that's the quiet miracle. Every act of preservation, no matter how small, is a bet that curiosity will outlast chaos. Now consider this, 5,000 years from now, what traces of our moment will remain? Not the monuments we built to impress, but the scraps we tucked away, intentionally or not, like breadcrumbs for the unknowable future. Because in the end, knowledge doesn't survive by accident. It survives because someone, somewhere, chose to bend down and press their hand into the wet clay of time. Script segment, standing at the edge of history, looking back at the clay tablets, palm leaf manuscripts, and digital vaults we've explored, one truth emerges. The urge to preserve isn't about clinging to the past, it's about handing a torch forward. Every civilization that carved stories into stone or sealed truths in caves was making the same quiet bet that someone someday would care enough to keep the flame alive. The irony is profound. The Mesopotamians baked their records to outlast fire, while we now etch data into crystals designed to survive supernova. The tools change, but the heartbeat behind them doesn't. That monk hunching over a parchment in a freezing scriptorium and the engineer burying code in Arctic ice are kin, divided by centuries, united by the same stubborn refusal to let time have the last word. Yet today's challenges would baffle ancient scribes. How do you preserve a viral meme or an AI's fleeting decision? Our digital footprints vanish faster than footprints in tide-washed sand. But here's the secret we've inherited from those who came before. Preservation isn't a one-time act, it's a habit. Just as Buddhist monks recopied sutras before the old ones crumbled, we must migrate files, update formats, and keep translating wisdom into languages the future will understand. The most humbling lesson isn't about technique, it's about humility. The Rosetta Stone's creators never imagined their tax decree would unlock lost civilizations. The Maya scribes painting star charts couldn't foresee astronomers centuries later gasping at their precision. The things we casually save today, a grandparent's voice memo, a scientist's lab notes, might become someone else's Rosetta Stone. So here's the invitation: be someone's medieval monk. Save that podcast episode that moved you. Back up the photos that tell your story. Support the libraries and archives fighting decay daily. Because the chain of knowledge is only as strong as its next link. And if you believe, as generations before us did, that our brightest ideas deserve to outlive us, hit like and let's keep this conversation alive. Subscribe to join us as we keep unearthing history's quietest victories. After all, the future is counting on us to remember.